here's a part of the police report that I turned in to him. I won't go into the names, but JB and LK were the two receptionists. He had them facing towards each other. He was sitting over there in front of that little half-height door. And then he had Mike and I, the security guard. He made us each stand at specific places. And throughout the hostage ordeal, I would occasionally approach the front desk. I'd keep trying to get closer to it, and I'd get clear up where I could put my arms on it. And I was just trying to give assurance to the two receptionists. And then he'd point the gun at me and say, back off. And so I'd back up a little bit. And Mike was standing. This was brilliant on Mike's part. He was standing in the doorway of his office where he could see everything with his right eye, but the gunman could not see his left ear. And Mike had a telephone right here on the desk, and he was in touch with the developing command center outside through his telephone. And he could pick up the phone and talk on his left ear and choose times to move his lips when the gunman wasn't looking at him, and give the outside command center real good information as all this was developing. So he had a very good and effective position, but that's kind of how we were laid out. And gunman, it was obvious he was high. He was, as it turned out later, they did a workup on him and discovered all he had in his system was marijuana. But he was very paranoid, and he would laugh at times at his own situation or jokes or comments that he'd made, and then he'd snap back and he'd get real serious and look at all of us like we're planning something, and he'd get angry. And during one of those times when he got angry and was looking around, he said, "You have no idea what it's like to be impaled with number 5 rebar." And that's when I knew who we were dealing with. I didn't have a clue until that point. But this was the guy who had got hurt on our job 4 years before. And you know what I tell folks, Matt, you don't know when somebody walks through your door what their source of anger may be or how long it's festered. But this was the guy who had been hurt on our property.
Somebody who feels they have a grievance from years past. You're past it. You've moved on. Things have changed in your world, but not necessarily in theirs. And they're still focused on it. Right.
So true. And we've seen this. We now, we track deadly force incidents. We've seen people come back mad because something went wrong in their marriage and the pastor took their wife's side, or some counselor gave them bad advice and they're here to exact revenge. There's a lot of reasons people let anger fester and come back to exact revenge. And so we learned why he was there. And at one point when I was standing out kind of where he wanted me to stand, farther away from the desk, I turned around and I looked outside. And Matt, it seemed so distant to look outside. And I got to admit, I had the thought cross my mind, I wonder if I'll ever get out there again. And when I did that, though, a police officer in SWAT gear, had his riot gear and his rifle, his face shield. He had been positioned behind this column just outside, and he stepped out behind the column just enough to let me see him. And Matt, he just nodded to me like that. And then he stepped back behind the column. And what he was saying was, "I'm watching. I got your back. And I'm armed." I'm ready to intervene. My opinion of law enforcement changed at that moment and has never gone back. These are guys who will give their life protecting you. They've signed up for it. They're ready to go. And that's exactly what security operators in a church have done. They've signed up for it. They're ready. And it changed me forever on how I viewed law enforcement and eventually how I viewed security. But back to the inside, we went on in that situation for a full hour and a half. And it was, there were some really hairy times. At one time, I was right up next to the desk there that you see in that slide, and I'd gotten up close to it. And I grew up around guns. I had a healthy respect for them, and I was a hunter. And I slept with a 357 Ruger Blackhawk beside my bed. I was John Wayne, you know. I was ready. I thought. I realized then and years later I wasn't anywhere close to ready. But I had all these mindsets. But one thing I did appreciate was safe handling of a firearm. And this guy talked with his hands. They're waving all over the place all the time. And his fingers on the trigger and the hammer of that 1911 A1 style Walther. It was a Walther, but it had the slide like a 1911 and a hammer. Hammer's pulled back and his fingers on the trigger. And he's sitting there kneecap to kneecap with these women and talking with his hands continually. And I thought, he's going to kill somebody accidentally. And evidently, the anger was showing in my face, and he jumped up and he shoved the barrel of that gun in my forehead, called me all sorts of names, said, "You're looking at me like you're mad." And he pounded his chest with the gun. He said, "I'm the one mad, you understand?" And he shoved it back in my forehead, and I'm standing there with my arms off to the side. And you know, I had never been in a situation like that. Where I thought, oh, this is how it's going to end. I'd always wondered. And Matt, of course I survived, but I've used that to help people who lost a husband who was a police officer or something, to help them understand. I had time for one prayer. I mean, you prioritize your prayers in these situations. And for me, I didn't need to pray to get saved. I'd checked that box a long time ago, and I was confident of where I was going. I didn't need to spend any foolish time there. I knew where I was going. But my prayer was for my wife and children. We laughed a lot in our home. And I prayed, I said, Lord, to help them understand this was not a traumatic event for me. This is fine. And Lord, help them to continue laughing and loving life and enjoying life. Don't let them get bogged down in this, oh, this is my story and my daddy was killed. And I didn't want any of that. And I prayed for my wife to find a good man that she could enjoy life with. And those were my priorities. And after I got done praying all that, I thought, wow, I got time for another prayer. I said, Lord, have him put the gun down. And that prayer was answered immediately. He put the gun down, he sat down, and I actually backed away from the desk on my own that time. But so there were a lot of things like that went on. And finally, through a series of things, we were able to get a hostage negotiator on the phone to him. And I remember at one point being aggravated because I could only hear his side of the conversation, the gunman's side of the conversation. And I remember getting so mad, I thought they've got some friend or brother of his on the phone, and they're wasting precious time. They need to cut this conversation and get a negotiator on there. And then out of the blue, the guy says, okay, I'll do that. I'll let him go in exchange for that. And I thought, wow, he is on the phone to a negotiator. And so when the ladies heard that, they got up and they started out of the reception area there. He let them open that little door and they came out. They came around this side and came out towards the front. I stood here and opened this door, and Mike had come over and was holding that door open for him. So we let the ladies go out. They get about right here, Matt, and one of the ladies said, oh, I forgot my purse. And Mike and I both said, leave it. And she said, oh, I can't. My car keys are in there. She literally walked back in, walked past the gunman, who's still on the phone to the negotiator, nodded at him, said, excuse me, while she opened the door, got her purse, walked back out with a kind little thank you, and came back out. I've thought back to that, and I've thought, you can't predict what other people are going to do in a serious situation. You just can't. And but we had our after action review, and one kind of funny thing that came out of that, and I often tell this to kind of loosen folks up. There's always something to laugh about. And in the after action review that we had with law enforcement and all of our involved team there at Focus on the Family, that was on Tuesday afternoon after the incident happened on Thursday the week before. Mike, the security guard, turns to me in this after action review. He says, why were you wanting me to start a fire? And I said, Mike, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, yeah, you kept asking me we should start a fire. And I couldn't figure out what he was talking about. And then it occurred to me, I said, no, Mike. I had noticed a sniper in a back hallway over there where it says PD. I had seen the front ramp of a rifle back there, an M16 style front ramp. And I had realized that there's also a sniper back there. I found out later they were all over there, and I just saw one. There's one at the top of the stairs. There was another across from this guy. They were all over, but I didn't know. I saw the one, and I was trying to tell Mike that you're in the line of fire. I knew the sniper was aimed at the gunman, and I was trying to tell Mike he was in the line of fire, as if the sniper didn't know that. But I would whisper to him, you're in the line of fire. And the gunman would turn around like, what, somebody saying something? And then the gunman would turn back around. And so that was the one funny thing that came out of it. But then when I think back on it, we did some good things. There's no question. We had a fast and early response. The panic alarms worked in that respect. We did have some strategic positioning where we, like Mike standing in that door where he could see his right side but not his left side, and Mike could be on the phone. So we did that. We did consistent escalation and de-escalation. I mean, the ladies did a remarkable job of that. They were handing him water bottles, trying to get him to talk about his family. They were remarkable in the way they were de-escalating him. I wasn't a good de-escalator. I didn't know anything about the process at that point. Law enforcement really complimented us because they said because of the way Mike and I were managing things, we contained it. We kept him from going mobile. We kept everything right there. And I didn't even know that was a big deal to do, but we did it. we were offering reassurance to the ladies. Um, we had some very strategic communication. At one point, I asked him. I knew who he was, but I couldn't figure out his name. And I told him we were trying to get a hold of workers' compensation for him because that was his big thing. As soon as I talk to workers' compensation, this will all be over. So I worked up a story about how we were trying to get a hold of workers' compensation, and I said, who shall I tell him is calling? I needed his name, and he gave me his name. I wrote it down on the back of a business card, and then I walked back to my position, but I walked past Mike and slipped him that card and said, here's the guy's name. And Mike was able to call out to the command center and let him know the name of the gunman. So that helped. Didn't realize it then. I'd never heard of the term, but we were doing the OODA loop, and I'll talk more about that here in a second. And it was the National Day of Prayer. I mean, prayer was happening all over the place. It was really the starting days of the internet. And I thought, wow, the news of this has probably gone clear around town. People are reading emails. I didn't have the concept for it had gone clear around the globe, and people were reading about it and praying about it clear around the globe. That was still incomprehensible in 1996. I hadn't gotten my mind around it. But the OODA loop was a system designed by a Air Force commander. I think he was a colonel, Tom Boyd, and it was initiated for dogfights in the air, but it has now been adopted by other military branches and by law enforcement. It's very real. It's the way to stay alive in a dogfight at first, but now it's any kind of a gun battle. You observe what's happening, then you orient yourself within that field. You make a decision on how you can help, and then you act on that decision, and you observe how it's affected the bad guy in the field. And now, where are you oriented? And you make a new decision and a new action. It's called a OODA loop. And the plan is to stay in front of the bad guy. And that's really what we were doing. We were operating the OODA loop. Didn't even know it existed. But if you know it exists, you can start planning it. And the significance of it being the National Day of Prayer is unspeakable in so many ways. This is the days before text messaging and all of that. And I had an older brother in Washington, D.C., who didn't even know that I was being held hostage. But this had come across in my fax while I was being held hostage. My brother just decided he wanted to share a scripture with me that day, and he had faxed this to me. We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. 2 Corinthians 4, 8, and 9. I found that laying on my fax machine later that same night when I was going through the building with the bomb squad again, making sure there were no other packages anywhere. And I came by my fax machine and saw that message on there. I mean, God was working in remarkable ways. But we also recognized, Matt, there were things that we did not do so well. We were not really prepared. Like I said, we'd sat in committee meetings. We'd talked about plans. We weren't really prepared. Better prepared than not having done anything. But my goodness, we realized there was so much that we had not done. We did not expect a mass crime scene with 1,300 employees who could not get to their vehicles that night and had to be bussed by the police department taking over a local school. Their buses, they got them to come and bus our people down to another building that we leased a couple miles away, and news went out over radio to all family of focus on the family employees. You can meet your family in the parking lot of 1455 Kelly Johnson Boulevard, or whatever the exact address was. I think that was it. And so people all over town were hearing by radio that they could go there and pick up their family members. uh, we had no training except on the fire alarm system. But like for the panic alarm system, one of the things we learned is that you enter those things cautiously. When you're responding to a panic alarm that's been set off from somewhere, you go in expecting something has really happened. We had one of our facilities guys carrying a radio who came running in the front door, went running right up to the desk and put his hands on it all out of breath, said, "What's going on?" And the gunman jumped up and shoved the gun in his forehead, and I saw this guy just turn white. I saw the blood flush out of his system, just turned ghost white, and the gunman's yelling at him that he's going to blow his brains out, and I thought it was really going to happen. So do training, do drills. It's not enough just to put in a panic system, test it, and do drills on it. And we'd done none of that kind of thing. There was no contact to family except for what existed in the building, and nobody outside of the building was let in during the hostage phase. So there was no contact to my family or the other hostages. That nobody knew our home phone numbers off the top of their head. That's all changed through the years with the invention of cell phones, etc. But do think about it. And we did not develop any kind of a watch list. I found out from the gunman that one of our vice presidents knew he was spinning out of control. He kept asking to see that vice president and telling us, I've been talking to him a lot lately. He knows how mad I am. It would have sure been nice if we had known this was developing. And I encourage teams to make sure your executive wing is speaking to you. We didn't, the after event emotions are incredible. The only real injury we had that day was one of the ladies had a complete nervous breakdown and was never able to again serve. And then the media, we were not prepared for the media. We had a media tent city set up outside next day, as you can imagine, etc. But since he served his 17-year prison sentence, I went to all of his parole hearings, and parole hearings are not like a scene out of Shawshank Redemption where there's a bunch of the parole board sitting around asking you questions. No, when you go to a parole hearing, you're sitting kneecap to kneecap with the offender, and it's probably going to be you, the offender, and one representative of the parole board. And I went to every parole hearing he had and sat right there kneecap to kneecap with him. And I never had to say a word. I could tell by the things he was saying he was going to serve his full 17 years, and he did. I wrote the book, Evil Invades Sanctuary. It's available out there on Amazon and on our bookstore at our website. And that was really the launching book for establishing faith-based security. And then started the FBSN, as you mentioned, Matt, the founder and president of the Faith-Based Security Network. We focus on three words: helping people be ready, willing, and able. And we're a membership association of the people who are involved in faith-based security. And when we say we help them be ready, willing, and able, ready means you're there, you show up, you're present, you're spiritually ready. Willing means you're mentally prepared. You're like that police officer who stood out behind me and nodded. You've gone through the mental preparation. You are committed to the safety of others. Able means you're trained and equipped. So we want to encourage people to become a member of the FBSN. There's a QR code and our website is up there. But please be serious about what you're doing. Become a member of the FBSN. And we've got a lot of member resources, and there's just a lot of valuable information. Some of that we make free to the public, and some of it's behind the door of membership. And then, fortunately, we've been able to see church security really increase across the nation and become recognized and proven. So that's the course correction event that happened in my life. And I just want to encourage folks to get plugged in, and start operating with intentionality in this field of faith-based security. Thank you, Matt.
Well, thanks, Carl, for sharing with us. And again, our life ought to be full of course corrections, right? In the security realm, in the spiritual realm, in the family realm. When something doesn't work, or when we learn a better way, we need to change doing things. So, so a question for you out there, and you've already danced all around this in your talk, but what would you say to the church security team, or to the member of a church that maybe doesn't even have a church security team, that's kind of in that mind space that you guys were at Focus on the Family before any of this stuff happened? They're not thinking that it could happen here. They're not even considering security at all. What would you say to somebody that's in that mindset in today's world?
Listen to what God's speaking to you. Listen, I've been kind of rough on myself and on Focus, saying, we missed the clues. We weren't really prepared, which is all true. But one thing that did happen is we did listen, and we began being intentional about the way we were changing our panic alarm system, by the way we were looking at our suicide call alert, by the way we implemented positive alarm sequence in our fire alarm. All of those were things that took effort, and it took budget. So yes, we were paying attention. We were making changes. We did bring on a security position, regardless of what you call him. Bring them on, regardless of the fact that it might be somebody that doesn't have all the ideal credentials. Bring them on. Start getting intentional. Listen to that still small voice, that thing that has gone off, and you think at first, this is stupid and I don't have time for this. Yeah, you probably don't. But I guarantee you, when he walks in your building with a gun, you've got time. Time just became his. Pay attention to that thing that you've been listening partially to, and get intentional about the safety of your people.
Get intentional about your course correction. God's pointing you out something, you need to correct that course. Well, again, Carl, thank you so much for sharing with us today your story of a very traumatic event at Focus on the Family, that bomb threat, having a gun pointed to you, and navigating that as God enabled you to do so. If you found this video helpful in any way, shape, or form, we would invite you to like this video, share it with somebody else, subscribe to our channel, drop a comment down. We read every single comment posted, and we'll respond to those. But it's a blessing having you join us, Carl. It's been a blessing listening to your story, and we pray that this video will help churches and church security operators stay ready, willing, and able to defend the flock that they're in charge of. Again, Carl, thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thank you, Matt.